Thomas Wellington had served the British royal family for 23 years. His polished black boots had walked the marble floors of Buckingham Palace since he was 19 years old. The gold buttons on his red uniform had witnessed history unfold before his very eyes. He had stood guard during state dinners, royal weddings, and moments that would be remembered forever in the pages of history books. The morning of September 8, 2022, started like any other day for Thomas. He woke up at 5 in the morning in his small apartment near the palace. His routine never changed. Black tea with 2 sugars, toast with marmalade, and exactly 15 minutes to read the morning newspaper. His uniform was pressed to perfection. His shoes shined until they reflected like mirrors. But this day would be different from all the others. This day would test everything Thomas believed in, everything he had sworn to protect, and everything he held dear about duty and honor. As Thomas walked through the palace gates, he noticed something unusual in the air. The staff members were whispering in small groups. Their faces carried expressions he had never seen before. Some looked worried, others appeared to be crying quietly. The usual cheerful morning greetings were replaced by solemn nods and concerned glances. Thomas approached his commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, who was standing near the main entrance with a phone pressed to his ear. The captain's face was pale and his usually perfect posture seemed to have crumbled. When he ended the call, his hands were shaking slightly. "Wellington," Captain Reynolds called out in a voice that sounded strained and tired. "I need to speak with you immediately." Thomas followed his superior into a small office that overlooked the palace gardens. The room was quiet except for the ticking of an old grandfather clock that had been there longer than either man had served. Captain Reynolds sat down heavily in his chair and gestured for Thomas to take a seat across from him. "Thomas," the captain began, using his first name instead of his surname, which was unusual for official conversations. "I have some very serious news to share with you. News that will change everything we know about our service to the crown." Thomas felt his heart begin to race. In all his years of service, he had never seen his commanding officer look so shaken. The captain was known for his steady nerves and unwavering composure, even during the most stressful royal events. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II passed away yesterday evening at Balmoral Castle, Captain Reynolds announced quietly. She died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her family. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. The woman he had served faithfully for over 2 decades, the monarch he had sworn to protect with his life, was gone. Queen Elizabeth had been more than just a ruler to Thomas. She had been a symbol of everything good and noble about service, duty, and dedication. Thomas remembered the first time he had met the Queen personally. It was during a small reception for long-serving palace staff. She had approached him with a warm smile and thanked him for his years of faithful service. Her eyes had sparkled with kindness, and she had asked about his family and his life outside the palace walls. That moment had meant everything to Thomas, and it had strengthened his resolve to serve the crown with even greater dedication. "There's more. Wellington," Captain Reynolds continued, his voice growing even more serious. "With the Queen's passing, her son Charles has immediately become King Charles III. And as you know, this means that Camilla, his wife, has automatically become Queen Consort." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. He had known this day would come eventually, but he had never truly prepared himself for what it would mean. For years he had struggled with the idea of Camilla becoming queen. In his heart, he still remembered Princess Diana, the woman he believed should have been queen. He remembered watching her funeral procession, seeing her sons walking behind her coffin, and feeling that something precious and irreplaceable had been lost forever. "I understand this may be difficult for you, Thomas," Captain Reynolds said gently. "Many of us remember Princess Diana fondly, but we must remember our duty. We serve the crown, regardless of who wears it." Thomas nodded slowly, but inside his mind was racing. He thought about his oath of service, the words he had spoken when he first joined the Royal Guard. He had promised to serve and protect the monarch with loyalty and honor. But he had made that promise to Queen Elizabeth II, not to Camilla. "The official announcement will be made this afternoon," Captain Reynolds explained. "There will be a period of mourning followed by the coronation ceremony. During this time, we must all show our complete support and respect for the new king and queen." As Thomas left the office, his mind was filled with conflicting emotions. Grief for the loss of Queen Elizabeth mixed with anger and confusion about what was expected of him now. He walked through the palace corridors, seeing the familiar paintings and tapestries, but everything felt different somehow. That evening, Thomas sat in his apartment staring at a framed photograph of Princess Diana that he kept on his mantelpiece. The picture showed her visiting a children's hospital, her face glowing with genuine care and compassion. Beside it was a letter of commendation he had received from Queen Elizabeth for his years of faithful service. Thomas picked up the photograph and studied Diana's face. He remembered her warmth, her dedication to helping others, and the way she had connected with people from all walks of life. In his heart, she would always be the true queen, the woman who should have worn the crown. As he prepared for bed that night, Thomas made a decision that would change his life forever. He would continue to serve, but he would serve according to his own conscience and his own understanding of what was right and honorable. He would not compromise his beliefs, even if it meant facing consequences he could not yet imagine. The next morning would bring new challenges, new expectations, and new tests of his loyalty. But Thomas Wellington was prepared to stand by his principles no matter what the cost might be. The palace felt different in the days following Queen Elizabeth's death. The usual hustle and bustle was replaced by a somber atmosphere that seemed to settle into every corner of the grand building. Black drapes hung from windows, and staff members moved quietly through the corridors, speaking in hushed tones. Thomas arrived for his shift 3 days after receiving the devastating news. He had spent those days thinking, remembering, and wrestling with the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. Sleep had been difficult, and when he did manage to rest, his dreams were filled with memories of Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana. As he walked toward his assigned post, Thomas noticed that preparations were already underway for the upcoming coronation ceremony. Workers were busy arranging flowers, polishing silver, and ensuring that every detail would be perfect for the historic event. The sight filled him with a mixture of sadness and determination. His assignment that morning was to stand guard outside the throne room, where King Charles and Queen Camilla were scheduled to meet with members of Parliament. It would be Thomas's first official duty since learning about the change in the monarchy, and he could feel his heart pounding as he took his position. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doors to the throne room opened, and King Charles emerged, followed closely by Camilla. Thomas had seen them both many times before, but now everything was different. Now they wore the weight of the crown, and everyone around them was expected to show the proper respect and reverence. King Charles looked tired but dignified in his formal attire. His face carried the burden of his new responsibilities, and Thomas could see the grief in his eyes for his recently departed mother. Despite his personal feelings, Thomas felt a moment of sympathy for the new king, who had waited his entire life for this role and received it under such sad circumstances. But when Thomas looked at Camilla, his feelings became much more complicated. She wore an elegant navy blue dress with a matching hat, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in the royal family. To everyone else in the palace, she was now Queen Camilla, deserving of all the honor and respect that came with that title. As the royal couple approached Thomas's position, protocol demanded that he bow respectfully and acknowledge their presence. This was a simple gesture that he had performed thousands of times for Queen Elizabeth, and it had always felt natural and right. King Charles passed by first, and Thomas found himself able to bow respectfully. After all, Charles was the rightful heir to the throne, the Queen's eldest son and now the lawful King of England. But when Camilla approached, something inside Thomas froze. He stood perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead, as if she were invisible. He did not bow, he did not acknowledge her presence, and he did not show any of the respect that protocol demanded. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but to Thomas it felt like an eternity. Camilla noticed immediately. She slowed her pace slightly and looked directly at Thomas, clearly expecting the customary bow that every guard was required to give. When it didn't come, a flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by what appeared to be disappointment. King Charles, who was a few steps ahead, did not notice the incident. He continued walking toward the throne room, focused on the important meeting that awaited him. But several other palace staff members witnessed what had happened, and Thomas could feel their shocked stares burning into him. One of the senior courtiers, Sir William Hartley, was standing nearby and saw the entire exchange. His eyes widened in disbelief, and Thomas knew that word of his defiance would spread quickly through the palace. Sir William had served the royal family for over 30 years. and he understood better than anyone how serious Thomas's breach of protocol had been. After the royal couple had passed, Thomas remained at his post, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just done. He had openly defied royal protocol in front of witnesses, and there would certainly be consequences. But despite the fear that was beginning to build in his chest, he felt no regret about his actions. During his lunch break, Thomas sat alone in the staff dining area, picking at his food without much appetite. He could hear other guards and palace workers whispering about him from nearby tables. Some looked at him with confusion, others with disapproval, and a few with what appeared to be understanding. Margaret Stevens, an elderly housekeeper who had worked at the palace for 40 years, approached Thomas's table. She had always been kind to him, often asking about his family and sharing stories about her own grandchildren. "Thomas, dear," she said quietly, sitting down across from him, "I heard about what happened this morning. Are you all right?" Thomas looked up at the woman who had become almost like a grandmother to him during his years of service. Her weathered face showed genuine concern, and her eyes held no judgment, only kindness. "I don't know, Margaret," Thomas admitted honestly. "I just couldn't do it." "I couldn't bow to her and pretend that everything is normal." Margaret nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I understand, love. Many of us have complicated feelings about the changes happening here. We all loved Queen Elizabeth dearly, and we all remember Princess Diana fondly. Diana was supposed to be queen," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was the one who truly cared about people, who made a difference in the world. Not her." "I know you feel strongly about this, Thomas," Margaret replied gently, "but you must be careful. What you did this morning won't go unnoticed. Sir William saw everything, and he's already been asking questions about your behavior." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Sir William Hartley was not known for his mercy when it came to breaches of protocol. He had been instrumental in maintaining the strict standards of royal service for decades, and he would not tolerate any disrespect toward the new queen. "What do you think will happen?" Thomas asked, though he already suspected the answer. "I don't know, dear," Margaret said sadly, "but I fear this is only the beginning. If you continue on this path, you may lose everything you've worked for during your years of service here." As Thomas returned to his duties that afternoon, he could feel the weight of every stare, every whispered conversation, and every disapproving glance from his colleagues. Word of his defiance was spreading throughout the palace, and he knew that he had crossed a line from which there might be no return. But even as fear began to take hold of him, Thomas remained convinced that he had done the right thing. In his heart, he knew that true loyalty meant staying faithful to his principles, even when it came at a great personal cost. The summons came the next morning. Thomas was barely halfway through his routine morning inspection when a young courier approached him with an official envelope bearing the royal seal. The formal script on the outside read, "Mr. Thomas Wellington, urgent meeting required. Office of Sir William Hartley." Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he held the envelope. He had expected this moment, but that didn't make it any easier to face. Around him, other guards continued their duties, but he could feel their curious glances and hear their hushed conversations. Word had spread throughout the palace about his refusal to acknowledge Queen Camilla, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The walk to Sir William's office felt longer than usual. Thomas passed through corridors lined with portraits of former monarchs, their painted eyes seeming to judge him as he made his way to what could very well be the end of his career. The grandfather clocks in the hallways ticked loudly, marking each second that brought him closer to his fate. Sir William Hartley's office was located in one of the palace's oldest sections. The room was filled with dark wood furniture, leather-bound books, and ceremonial swords that had been passed down through generations of royal service. Behind the massive desk sat Sir William himself, a man in his 70s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Sit down, Wellington," Sir William commanded without looking up from the papers spread across his desk. His voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades managing the complex protocols of royal life. Thomas took the seat across from the desk and waited. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Sir William continued to read through what appeared to be Thomas's service record. Finally, the older man set the papers aside and fixed his penetrating gaze on Thomas. 23 years of exemplary service," Sir William began, his tone neutral but cold. Commendations for dedication, reliability, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. Not a single mark against your record until yesterday morning." Thomas remained silent, knowing that anything he said at this point would likely make matters worse. "Do you have any idea how serious your actions were yesterday?" Sir William continued, his voice growing harder. "You deliberately refused to show proper respect to Her Majesty Queen Camilla. In front of witnesses, in the palace corridors where such behavior reflects on all of us." "I understand the seriousness of my actions, sir," Thomas replied carefully. "Do you?" Sir William leaned forward, his eyes blazing with anger. "Because I'm not sure you truly comprehend what you've done. You've violated your oath of service, you've disrespected the crown, and you've set an example that could encourage other staff members to follow your lead." Thomas felt his resolve strengthen. "With respect, sir, my oath was to serve Queen Elizabeth II and the crown she represented. I never swore allegiance to someone I believe has no right to wear that crown." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Sir William's face turned red with fury, and for a moment Thomas thought the older man might actually shout at him. "How dare you?" Sir William said, his voice dangerously quiet. "How dare you presume to decide who has the right to wear the crown? King Charles is the rightful heir, and Camilla is his lawful wife. That makes her our queen, regardless of your personal feelings." "Princess Diana was his lawful wife first," Thomas said, surprising himself with his boldness. "She was the mother of the future king. She was the one who should be wearing that crown today." Sir William stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Princess Diana is dead, Wellington. She has been dead for over 25 years. You cannot continue to live in the past while the rest of us move forward with our duties. Diana may be gone, but what she represented isn't dead," Thomas replied, his voice growing stronger. "She represented kindness, compassion, and genuine care for ordinary people. She was the people's princess, and she would have been the people's queen." "And what exactly do you think Camilla represents?" Sir William demanded. "She has served this family faithfully for nearly 20 years. She has supported King Charles through difficult times. She has earned her place at his side." Thomas shook his head firmly. "She represents everything that went wrong. She's the reason Diana's marriage fell apart. She's the reason those two boys lost their mother. I will never accept her as my queen." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. Sir William walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, his hands clasped behind his back. When he turned around, his expression had changed from anger to something that looked almost like pity. "Thomas," he said, using his first name for the first time during the meeting, "I understand that you have strong feelings about Princess Diana. Many of us do. She was a remarkable woman who touched the lives of millions of people. But you're allowing your grief and your loyalty to her memory to cloud your judgment." "My judgment is perfectly clear," Thomas insisted. "I know right from wrong, and I know who deserves my respect." Sir William returned to his desk and picked up a different set of papers. "I've been looking into your background, Thomas. Did you know that your late father wrote several letters to Princess Diana during her lifetime?" Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat. He had never known about any letters. "Your father was a veteran who struggled with depression after his military service," Sir William continued. "He wrote to Princess Diana about his difficulties, and she personally responded to him. Not just once, but several times over the course of 3 years." Thomas stared at Sir William in shock. His father had died when Thomas was 16, and they had never talked about any correspondence with the royal family. "She helped him find counseling services," Sir William explained. "She arranged for him to receive support from military charities. According to these records, Princess Diana quite possibly saved your father's life through her personal intervention." Tears began to form in Thomas's eyes as he learned this information for the first time. It explained so much about his father's deep respect for Princess Diana, and it made Thomas's own feelings about her even more personal and meaningful. "So you see," Sir William said gently, "your loyalty to Princess Diana isn't just about her public image. It's deeply personal. It's about gratitude and family history. I respect that more than you might realize." Thomas wiped his eyes and looked up at Sir William with confusion. "Then why are we having this conversation? Why aren't you simply firing me?" Sir William sighed deeply. "Because despite what you might think, I'm not entirely without understanding. But Thomas, you cannot continue down this path. Your refusal to acknowledge Queen Camilla is causing disruption throughout the palace. Other staff members are talking, and some are even beginning to question whether they should follow your example. Maybe they should, Thomas said quietly. And maybe that kind of thinking will destroy everything we've worked to build here, Sir William replied sharply. The monarchy depends on stability, tradition, and respect for the institution regardless of personal feelings about individuals. Sir William walked around his desk and stood directly in front of Thomas. I'm going to give you one chance to correct this situation. Tomorrow morning, Queen Camilla will be walking through the main corridor again. You will be at your post and you will show her the proper respect. You will bow, you will acknowledge her position, and you will demonstrate that you understand your duty. Thomas felt his heart sinking. And if I refuse? Then you will be dismissed from service immediately, and you will forfeit your pension and all benefits, Sir William said firmly. 23 years of service will be wiped away as if they never happened. The weight of the ultimatum settled on Thomas's shoulders like a heavy blanket. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built during his years of faithful service hung in the balance. But as he looked into Sir William's eyes, he realized that some things were more important than job security. I need time to think, Thomas said finally. You have until tomorrow morning, Sir William replied. Choose wisely, Wellington. Choose very wisely. That evening, Thomas sat in his small apartment staring at the walls that had been his home for over 2 decades. The space was modest but comfortable, filled with memories from his years of service. Photographs of royal events lined the shelves, including several pictures of himself standing guard during important ceremonies. On his coffee table lay the letter that Sir William had given him copies of letters his father had exchanged with Princess Diana. Reading them had been one of the most emotional experiences of his life. His father's words revealed a depth of pain and struggle that Thomas had never fully understood as a teenager. In one letter, his father had written, Your Royal Highness, I find myself lost in a darkness that seems to have no end. The things I saw during my service have left me feeling hollow and broken. I write to you because you seem to understand suffering in a way that others do not. Princess Diana's response had been handwritten, personal and filled with genuine compassion. Dear Mr. Wellington, your courage in reaching out shows tremendous strength, not weakness. I have enclosed information about counseling services that have helped other veterans. Please know that your service to our country is deeply valued, and your life has meaning beyond the darkness you're experiencing now. The correspondence had continued for 3 years, with Diana personally following up on his father's progress and celebrating small victories in his recovery. Thomas realized that without her intervention, he might have lost his father much earlier than he did. As he held these precious letters, Thomas felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. His love for Princess Diana wasn't just about her public image or her royal status. It was about the real difference she had made in his family's life. She had been more than a princess to them, she had been an angel of mercy. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Thomas opened it to find Margaret Stevens standing in the hallway, holding a steaming cup of tea and wearing a concerned expression. I thought you might need some company tonight, she said gently. May I come in? Thomas welcomed her inside and they sat together on his worn sofa. Margaret looked around the apartment, taking in the photographs and mementos from his years of service. Sir William told me about your meeting, she said carefully. He's giving you a chance to make things right. Is that what you think I should do? Thomas asked. Bow to her and pretend that everything is fine? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, sipping her tea thoughtfully. Thomas dear, I've worked in this palace for 40 years. I've seen kings and queens come and go. I've witnessed scandals, celebrations, tragedies, and triumphs. And through it all, I've learned one important truth. What's that? The institution is bigger than any one person, Margaret said gently. The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years because it adapts and endures, regardless of our personal feelings about individual royals. Thomas shook his head. But what about principles? What about standing up for what's right? And what exactly is right in this situation? Margaret challenged him. Camilla didn't force Charles to leave Diana. She didn't cause the car accident that took Diana's life. She's simply a woman who fell in love with a man and has now found herself in a position she never asked for. She destroyed Diana's marriage, Thomas said firmly. Charles destroyed his own marriage, Margaret replied. He was the one who was married. He was the one who made the choice to be unfaithful. Blaming Camilla for Charles's decisions isn't fair, and it certainly isn't grounds for refusing to do your job. Thomas felt frustrated by Margaret's logic, but he couldn't entirely dismiss her points. So you think I should just give in? Bow to her and act like nothing happened? I think you should consider what Princess Diana would want you to do, Margaret said thoughtfully. From everything I knew about her, she wasn't a woman who held grudges or sought revenge. She moved forward with her life and focused on helping others. Thomas looked down at the letters from his father. She saved my father's life. How can I honor her memory by showing respect to the woman who helped destroy her happiness? Maybe you honor her memory by showing the same compassion and forgiveness that she showed to others, Margaret suggested. Diana was known for her ability to see the good in people, even those who had hurt her. I can't do it, Margaret, Thomas said, his voice breaking slightly. I just can't bow to her and pretend that she deserves the crown that should have been Diana's. Margaret set down her teacup and turned to face Thomas directly. Then you need to prepare yourself for the consequences. Sir William isn't bluffing about dismissing you. He can't allow your defiance to spread to other staff members. I know, Thomas said quietly. I've accepted that I'll probably lose my job. And your pension? Your benefits? Everything you've worked for during 23 years of faithful service? Thomas nodded, though the reality of losing everything was terrifying. Some things are more important than money. Margaret stood up and walked to the window overlooking the palace grounds. I admire your principles, Thomas. I truly do. But I also worry that you're making a decision based on emotion rather than reason. Maybe, Thomas admitted, but I have to live with myself after this is over. If I bow to her tomorrow, I'll be betraying everything I believe in. And if you don't bow to her, you'll be throwing away a career that has defined your entire adult life, Margaret pointed out. They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Margaret stood up to leave. Whatever you decide tomorrow, Thomas, know that I respect your right to follow your conscience. I just hope you're prepared for where that path might lead. After Margaret left, Thomas spent the rest of the evening looking through photo albums from his years of service. He found pictures of himself standing guard during Queen Elizabeth's Jubilee celebrations, royal weddings, and state dinners. He remembered the pride he had felt, wearing his uniform and representing the crown, but mixed in with those official photographs were newspaper clippings about Princess Diana, pictures of her visiting hospitals, comforting children, and championing causes that others ignored. These images reminded him of why he had always admired her and why her memory meant so much to him. As midnight approached, Thomas made his final decision. He would go to work the next morning and take his position as ordered. When Queen Camilla passed by, he would stand at attention and look straight ahead just as he had done before. He would not bow. He would not acknowledge her as his queen, and he would accept whatever consequences followed. Some principles, Thomas decided, were worth more than job security. Some loyalties ran deeper than fear of punishment, and some memories were too precious to betray, even when the cost of honoring them was everything he had worked to build. Tomorrow would bring the end of his career, but it would also bring the beginning of something else, a life lived according to his own conscience, regardless of the price he would have to pay. The morning of reckoning arrived with gray skies and a cold wind that seemed to pierce through the palace walls. Thomas woke up before his alarm, having slept only a few hours. His stomach churned with nervous energy, but his resolve remained firm. Today would either mark his redemption or his downfall, and he was prepared for either outcome. As he put on his uniform for what might be the last time, Thomas took extra care with every detail. His buttons were polished to perfection, his boots shined like mirrors, and his posture was straighter than it had been in years. If this was to be his final day of service, he would look the part of a guard worthy of the crown he had served so faithfully. The walk to the palace felt different that morning. Other staff members who usually greeted him warmly now avoided eye contact or offered only nervous nods. Word had spread about the ultimatum he faced, and everyone seemed to understand that they were about to witness either his complete humiliation or his courageous stand for principle. Thomas arrived at his assigned post 30 minutes early. The corridor where he would stand was the same one where his defiance had begun just days earlier. Sir William Hartley was already there. positioned where he could observe everything that happened. His stern expression made it clear that there would be no mercy if Thomas chose to continue his rebellion. At exactly 10 o'clock, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the marble hallway. Thomas's heart began to race as he heard the familiar voices of King Charles and Queen Camilla drawing closer. This was the moment that would define the rest of his life. King Charles appeared first, walking with the measured pace of someone carrying the weight of the crown. He looked tired but determined, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that emphasized his new role as monarch. As he passed Thomas, the guard bowed respectfully, just as protocol demanded. Then came Queen Camilla. She wore an elegant burgundy dress with a matching hat, and her jewelry caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had finally claimed her rightful place in the royal hierarchy. As she approached Thomas's position, time seemed to slow down. He could feel the eyes of Sir William burning into him from across the corridor. He could sense the tension in the air as other staff members held their breath, waiting to see what would happen. Queen Camilla looked directly at Thomas as she approached, her expression unreadable. There was no hostility in her eyes, but there was also no warmth. She seemed to understand that this moment was about more than just royal protocol. It was about acceptance, respect, and the future of her reign. Thomas stood perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead as Queen Camilla passed directly in front of him. The moment when he should have bowed came and went. He did not move. He did not acknowledge her presence. He remained as motionless as a statue, his defiance as clear as if he had shouted it from the rooftops. Queen Camilla paused for just a fraction of a second, long enough to register what had happened. Then she continued walking, her expression unchanged but her pace slightly quicker than before. She disappeared around the corner with King Charles, leaving behind a corridor filled with shocked silence. Sir William's face was a mask of controlled fury. He approached Thomas slowly, his footsteps echoing ominously in the quiet hallway. "You've made your choice, Wellington," Sir William said in a voice that was deadly calm. "Report to my office immediately." Thomas followed his superior through the palace corridors one last time as an active member of the Royal Guard. Other staff members watched their procession with expressions ranging from sympathy to disapproval. Some seemed to admire his courage, while others clearly viewed him as a reckless fool who had thrown away everything for a meaningless gesture. In Sir William's office, the conversation was brief and formal. Thomas was officially dismissed from service, effective immediately. His security clearance was revoked, his access to the palace was terminated, and his pension was forfeited. 23 years of faithful service were erased as if they had never happened. "You understand that this dismissal will make it very difficult for you to find employment elsewhere," Sir William said as he filled out the paperwork. "Your refusal to follow direct orders will be noted in your record." "I understand," Thomas replied calmly. "I hope your principals provide you with comfort when you're struggling to pay your bills," Sir William added with barely concealed contempt. Thomas signed the necessary documents and surrendered his security badge, his keys, and his ceremonial sword. As he prepared to leave the office that had been the center of his professional life for over 2 decades, Sir William spoke once more. "Before you go, Wellington, I want you to know something. Queen Camilla asked me not to dismiss you." Thomas stopped in his tracks, stunned by this revelation. "She requested that we find another solution, perhaps a transfer to a different department, or a role that wouldn't require direct interaction with the royal family. She said she understood that some people needed time to adjust to changes in the monarchy." Thomas felt a wave of confusion wash over him. Why would she do that? "Because unlike you, she understands that forgiveness and compassion are more powerful than holding grudges," Sir William replied. "I overruled her request because I cannot allow insubordination to go unpunished. But I thought you should know that the woman you refused to respect showed you more mercy than you deserved." This information hit Thomas like a physical blow. In his mind, Queen Camilla had been a villain, someone who cared only about power and status. Learning that she had actually tried to protect his job forced him to confront the possibility that his perception of her might be flawed. As Thomas walked out of the palace for the final time, he carried with him a mixture of pride and regret. He had stood up for his principles and honored the memory of Princess Diana, but he had also lost everything he had worked to build during his adult life. The palace gates closed behind him with a finality that took his breath away. After 23 years of walking through those gates every morning, he was now on the outside looking in. The job that had defined his identity was gone, and he was left to figure out who he was without the uniform and the title that had shaped his sense of self. Standing on the street outside the palace, Thomas looked up at the windows where he had once stood guard. Somewhere inside those walls, Queen Camilla was continuing with her duties, probably unaware of the internal struggle she had created, simply by showing him kindness when he had shown her nothing but disrespect. For the first time since this ordeal began, Thomas found himself questioning whether his defiance had been heroic or simply stubborn. He had achieved his goal of not bowing to Queen Camilla, but the victory felt hollow when weighed against everything he had lost. As he walked away from the palace and toward an uncertain future, Thomas realized that the real test of his principles was just beginning. It was easy to be brave when you had a steady job and a secure future. Now he would discover whether his convictions were strong enough to sustain him when he had nothing else left. 3 months had passed since Thomas Wellington walked out of Buckingham Palace for the last time. The autumn had given way to winter, and London was covered in a blanket of gray that seemed to match Thomas's mood. His savings were running low, his job applications had been repeatedly rejected, and the reality of his situation was becoming harder to ignore each day. Thomas sat in a small cafe near his apartment, nursing a cup of coffee that he could barely afford. The newspaper in front of him was open to the employment section, but the circles around various job listings had become fewer and fewer as employers learned about his dismissal from royal service. Word traveled fast in certain circles, and his reputation for insubordination had preceded him to every interview. The bells above the cafe door chimed, and Thomas looked up to see Margaret Stevens entering with a concerned expression on her weathered face. She spotted him immediately and made her way to his table, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea. "I thought I might find you here," she said gently, setting 1 cup in front of him. "You look terrible, dear," Thomas managed a weak smile. "I feel about as good as I look. How are things at the palace?" Margaret sat down across from him, studying his face with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades caring for others. "Things are different without you there. Some of the younger guards ask about you quite often. I'm sure Sir William has told them exactly what they need to know about my character," Thomas replied bitterly. "Actually, he hasn't said much at all. There's been talk among the staff, though. Some admire what you did while others think you were foolish, but everyone agrees that you were one of the most dedicated guards the palace has ever had." Thomas stirred his tea absently. "Dedication doesn't pay the bills, Margaret. I'm starting to think I made the biggest mistake of my life. Have you given any thought to apologizing?" Margaret asked carefully. "Perhaps if you wrote a letter to Queen Camilla, explaining your actions and expressing regret." "I can't do that," Thomas said firmly. "I may be struggling, but I won't compromise my beliefs just to make my life easier." Margaret leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. "Thomas, there's something I need to tell you. Something that might change how you feel about this whole situation." Thomas looked up from his tea, sensing the importance in her tone. "Last week, I was cleaning Queen Camilla's private study when I overheard a conversation she was having with her secretary. She was discussing charitable work, and she specifically mentioned wanting to do something to help struggling veterans." Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. "What kind of help?" "She's establishing a foundation to provide job training and counseling services for military veterans who are having difficulty transitioning to civilian life." She mentioned that the idea came to her after learning about a former palace guard who had struggled with similar issues. The words hit Thomas like a thunderbolt. "She was talking about my father," Margaret nodded. "She specifically mentioned the correspondence between Princess Diana and your father. She said it inspired her to continue that work in Diana's memory." Thomas stared at Margaret in disbelief. "Queen Camilla is starting a foundation to honor Princess Diana?" "More than that," Margaret continued. "She's asked to name it the Diana Memorial Veterans Foundation. She wants to make sure that your father's story and others like it don't go unremembered." Thomas felt tears forming in his eyes. The woman he had refused to acknowledge, the person he had seen as an enemy to Diana's legacy, was actually working to continue Diana's compassionate work. "There's more," Margaret said gently. When she was discussing the foundation, She specifically mentioned wanting to hire people who understand the struggles that veterans face, people who have personal experience with the issues involved. Thomas looked up at Margaret with hope and confusion warring in his chest. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that Queen Camilla hasn't forgotten about you, Thomas. Despite everything that happened, she still believes you could make a valuable contribution to something meaningful. That evening, Thomas sat in his apartment holding the letters his father had exchanged with Princess Diana. He read them again, paying special attention to the compassion and understanding that Diana had shown to a stranger who was struggling with invisible wounds. For the first time since his dismissal, Thomas began to question whether his perception of Queen Camilla had been fair. He had seen her as someone who had destroyed Diana's happiness, but perhaps she was actually someone who was trying to honor Diana's legacy of helping others. The next morning, Thomas made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. He sat down at his small kitchen table and began to write a letter to Queen Camilla. Your Majesty, he began, his hand trembling slightly as he formed the words, I am writing to express my sincere regret for my behavior during your recent visits to the palace. My actions were unprofessional and disrespectful, and they reflected poorly on the institution I served for 23 years. He continued writing, pouring out his feelings about Princess Diana, his father's struggles, and his own confusion about how to honor the past while accepting the present. The letter grew longer as he explained his deep love for Diana's memory and his fear that accepting Camilla would somehow betray that love. I have learned that you are establishing a foundation to help veterans in Princess Diana's memory, he wrote. This news has forced me to confront the possibility that I have been wrong about your intentions and your character. If my dismissal has taught me anything, it is that holding on to anger and resentment ultimately hurts the person carrying those feelings more than anyone else. Thomas concluded the letter with a request that surprised even him as he wrote it. If you believe that my experience and my personal understanding of veterans' struggles could be of service to your foundation, I would be honored to contribute to this important work. I understand that my previous behavior may have disqualified me from such consideration, but I wanted you to know that I have learned from my mistakes and that I am committed to serving others rather than serving my own pride. He sealed the letter and walked to the nearest post office, his heart pounding with nervousness and hope. As he dropped the envelope into the mail slot, Thomas realized that he was taking the first step toward a future he had never imagined possible. 2 weeks later, Thomas received a response. The envelope bore the royal seal, and inside was a handwritten note from Queen Camilla herself. Dear Mr. Wellington, thank you for your honest and thoughtful letter. I believe that people who have faced difficulties often become the most effective helpers for others facing similar challenges. If you are truly interested in honoring Princess Diana's legacy through service to veterans, I would welcome the opportunity to discuss how you might contribute to our foundation. Please contact my secretary to arrange a meeting. Thomas read the letter 3 times, hardly believing that his defiance had somehow led to this unexpected opportunity. Queen Camilla was offering him a chance not just to rebuild his career, but to do work that would honor both his father's memory and Princess Diana's legacy. For the first time in months, Thomas felt hope returning to his life. Perhaps his journey of pride and punishment was about to become a story of redemption and purpose. 6 months later, Thomas Wellington stood in a completely different world from the one he had known as a palace guard. The offices of the Diana Memorial Veterans Foundation were located in a converted mansion in Kensington, not far from where Princess Diana had once lived. The walls were decorated with photographs of Diana's charitable work, mixed with images of veterans who had been helped by the foundation's programs. Thomas's transformation had been remarkable. Gone was the rigid military bearing and formal uniform of his palace days. Instead, he wore comfortable civilian clothes and carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had found his true calling. His title was Program Director for Veteran Services, and his days were filled with counseling sessions, job placement meetings, and the deeply satisfying work of helping people rebuild their lives. On this particular morning, Thomas was preparing for a special event. Queen Camilla was scheduled to visit the foundation for the official opening of a new counseling center that would be named in honor of Thomas's father. The irony of the situation was not Lost on Thomas, he was now working directly for the woman he had once refused to acknowledge, Margaret. Stevens had accepted a part-time position at the foundation after retiring from palace service, and she helped Thomas prepare for the Queen's arrival. Their friendship had deepened through their shared work, and Margaret often marveled at the changes she had witnessed in Thomas over the past months. "Are you nervous about seeing her again?" Margaret asked as they arranged chairs in the main conference room. Thomas paused in his work and considered the question carefully. "Nervous, yes, but not for the reasons you might think. I'm nervous because I want to show her how much this opportunity has meant to me." The transformation in Thomas's attitude toward Queen Camilla had been gradual but profound. Through their work together on the foundation, he had come to see her not as the villain of his imagination, but as a woman genuinely committed to making a difference in people's lives. She had personally reviewed every aspect of the foundation's programs, insisted on visiting with veterans individually, and demonstrated a level of care and attention that reminded Thomas of Princess Diana herself. At exactly 10 o'clock, Queen Camilla arrived with a small entourage. She wore a simple navy blue dress and carried herself with the same dignified bearing Thomas remembered from the palace, but there was something different about her demeanor. In this setting, surrounded by the important work of helping others, she seemed more relaxed and authentic than she had ever appeared in formal royal contexts. Thomas greeted her at the entrance, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, both remembering their difficult history. Then Queen Camilla smiled warmly and extended her hand. "Mr. Wellington," she said, "it's wonderful to see you again. I understand you've been doing exceptional work here." Thomas shook her hand and felt a surge of emotion he hadn't expected. "Your Majesty, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. It has changed my life in ways I never could have imagined." "I think you've changed some lives here as well," she replied, gesturing toward the photographs of veterans who had been helped by the Foundation's programs. As they toured the facility, Thomas was struck by Queen Camilla's genuine interest in the work being done. She spoke personally with several veterans who were participating in job training programs, asked detailed questions about counseling services, and demonstrated a deep understanding of the challenges faced by people transitioning from military to civilian life. During the formal ceremony to open the new counseling center, Queen Camilla gave a speech that moved Thomas to tears. She spoke about Princess Diana's legacy of compassion, about the importance of helping those who had served their country, and about the power of second chances. "Sometimes," she said, looking directly at Thomas, "our greatest mistakes can lead us to our most important work. Sometimes the people who challenge us the most are the ones who ultimately teach us the most about ourselves." After the ceremony, Thomas found himself alone with Queen Camilla in the room that would serve as the memorial to his father. The walls displayed the letters his father had exchanged with Princess Diana, along with photographs of his military service and a description of his struggles and recovery. "Your father was a remarkable man," Queen Camilla said quietly, studying the display. "His correspondence with Diana helped inspire this entire foundation." "I never knew about those letters until after my dismissal," Thomas admitted. "Learning about them made me realize how wrong I had been about so many things." Queen Camilla turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "You weren't wrong to love Princess Diana's memory, Thomas. And you weren't wrong to want to honor your father's relationship with her. You were only wrong in thinking that loving her memory required hating me." Thomas felt tears forming in his eyes. "I spent so many years angry about things I didn't fully understand. I thought you represented everything that had gone wrong, when really you were trying to make things right." "We all carry pain from the past," Queen Camilla replied gently. "Diana's death was a tragedy that affected everyone who knew her. Charles and I both grieve for the hurt that was caused during those difficult years, but we can honor her memory by continuing the work she believed in, not by allowing old wounds to prevent us from moving forward." Thomas nodded, finally understanding the wisdom in her words. "I want you to know that I see you clearly now, Your Majesty. I see the work you're doing, the lives you're changing, and the way you're honoring Diana's legacy. I was wrong to refuse you my respect, and I'm grateful that you were wise enough to show me mercy when I didn't deserve it." Queen Camilla placed a gentle hand on Thomas's arm. "You've more than earned my respect through your work here. The veterans you've helped, the programs you've developed, the dedication you've shown, all of this honors your father's memory, and Diana's legacy better than any bow or formal courtesy ever could. As the day concluded and Queen Camilla prepared to leave, she paused to speak with Thomas one final time. "I want you to know that your story has taught me something important as well," she said. "It reminded me that earning respect is more important than demanding it, and that sometimes the people who oppose us most strongly are the ones who care most deeply about the things we should care about too." Thomas watched as Queen Camilla's car disappeared down the street, and he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The anger that had driven his defiance was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and fulfillment that surprised him with its intensity. Margaret approached him as he stood in the doorway of the foundation building. "So," she said with a smile, "how does it feel to have come full circle?" Thomas considered her question carefully. "It doesn't feel like coming full circle," he said finally. "It feels like finally moving forward." That evening, Thomas returned to his apartment, which was now comfortable rather than desperate. On his mantelpiece sat the same photograph of Princess Diana that had inspired his defiance, but next to it was a new picture from the Foundation's opening ceremony. In the photo, Thomas stood alongside Queen Camilla and several veterans whose lives had been changed by their work together. Looking at both photographs, Thomas realized that true loyalty wasn't about holding on to the past or refusing to accept change. True loyalty was about carrying forward the best of what you had learned and using it to make the world better for others. Princess Diana's legacy lived on, not through his defiance of Queen Camilla, but through the compassionate work they were now doing together. His father's struggles had meaning, not because they represented past pain, but because they helped other veterans find hope and healing. Thomas Wellington had learned that sometimes the most important journeys begin with what seems like an ending. His dismissal from royal service had felt like a failure at the time, but it had actually been the beginning of the most meaningful work of his life. As he prepared for bed, Thomas felt grateful for every part of his story, the loyalty that had driven his defiance, the courage that had sustained him through his struggles, and the wisdom that had finally allowed him to see Queen Camilla not as an enemy to be opposed, but as a partner in honoring the memory of the people they both had loved.